Shalom Aleichem, look at the Sichas, Chelek Chav Dalet, volume 24, Sicha number 2 for Devarim. Unbelievable Rashi Sicha. Extraordinary. Okay, so it's based on the pasuk in the beginning of Devarim, where Moshe is telling the Jewish people that Hashem spoke to me, and he told me, Rav lochem shebes b'har hazeh, tell the people, it's enough sitting by this mountain, it's time to move. And there's a whole 2 verses where Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, tell them, Pnu asulachem, get going and go to the nations and conquer the land which I promised. It's time to go. Rav lochem shebes, it's enough. Genug. And the Rashi's on those words, Rav lochem shebes. Because Rav lochem is not exactly a clear statement. What does it mean, Rav? If you want to say it's enough, you could say die. You could say Rav is a little bit of a mysterious term. It means an exaggeration. Rav lachem means it's a lot. So Rashi apparently felt the need to comment. So let's bring it up. Here is the verse: the stay at the mountain has been ample. Rav lachem, says Rashi. Rav lachem shebes. That's the quote, the Dibur HaMaskal, the quote from the text. Says Rashi, kipshute, as understood straightforwardly, which means, according to the Rashi commentaries, that it's enough. Rav lachem means like dayenu, die. It's enough. That's enough. Let's get going. Remember, at this point, when Moshe is recounting this conversation that Hashem had with him, this is right before it was time to leave. So they were already at Har Sinai, Chorev, for 11 months. They arrived there the first year on Sivan, Rosh Chodesh, and this is a year later, Rosh Chodesh here. You're there for 11 months. Let's get going. So that is the first explanation. But Rashi doesn't suffice with that, then he gives a midrashic interpretation. That what? Rav lachem doesn't just mean it's enough. Rav here is more literal. Rav means a lot. You have achieved a lot on this mountain. That's what the Torah is saying. It's time to get going. And why? Because you've done so much. You did greatness and reward at this mountain. You made the Mishkan, the menorah, the vessels. You got the Torah. You appointed Sanhedrin. And you have leaders of thousands and hundreds. You did so much. So this is the 2 interpretations of Rashi. In short, you would say the first one is that Rav means enough. It's enough. Let's go. The second one is it's a lot. A lot got done. Let's go. So the first question and the main question is, why do we need the second interpretation at all? Rashi says by the first interpretation, kipshute. You should read it in a straightforward understanding, which means that's the literal interpretation. Why does he even need a midrashic interpretation? Don't we know that Rashi's stated goal for his commentary is not to quote all the midrashim, but rather to stick to the literal pshat? That's what he does. So when he says that you should read it and straightforwardly, leave it at that. You don't need a midrashic interpretation. The text is pretty straightforward. Rav lachem shebes, it's enough sitting at this mountain. Let's get going. Why do we need this whole midrashic interpretation? Rav, you did a lot. That's what Rav means, a lot. The simple meaning of Rav means enough. In fact, you don't even need the first interpretation, really. If the text is understood straightforwardly, leave the text alone. Rashi doesn't suffice by leaving it alone. He's not even suffice with one. He brings 2 interpretations. So this is a very, very interesting thing. That's question 1. And that's the main question that bothers the Rebbe when he studies Rashi, where the Rebbe teaches us to study Rashi. And it's got to be true to that principle of Pshuta Shal Mikra. It's here to explain the things in the literal, straightforward way. Why do you need a midrashic interpretation? If you study the Rebbe Sichas, you know that sometimes we need it because the simple, literal, straightforward meaning doesn't suffice, or there isn't a straightforward meaning. It's got to be learned on a midrashic level. But when the straightforward meaning carries through, leave it. Main question. Then, friends, the Rebbe has a couple more questions. Question number 2, I'm going to say like this. If Rashi decides that he wants to bring in the second interpretation of this medrash, and what does the medrash say again? Rav means a lot. A lot of greatness, great stuff has happened. And he quotes all these different things, the Mishkan, Kabbalah Tateda, the Sanhedrin. On the Pshat level, we're supposed to be true to text. If you look in text, there's one singular thing that the Torah describes that happened to the Jews that's considered great. That's the word, Gedula, godless. And you know what it is? Look in the portion of Aschana next week. And the language is that did anything happen so great? Has there ever been something so great? Has anyone ever heard of something so great? And what is it? The revelation at Har Sinai that God should come and choose a nation among nations and come to them, and the revelation. That's the greatness. So if Rashi insists that he needs to give an interpretation of greatness, take the greatness that's spelled out in text. Remember, Rashi is very text. He's true to text. What is the text of Torah called? Gedula, greatness, revelation. Instead, he quotes things that are not so great. And in fact, the Rebbe says in question 3, they're not even novel. The fact that they had Torah, they were studying Torah from Adam Arishon and Noach and Avram and the Avos and the Levium and Mitzrayim. The concept of Torah is not novel. So you can't call it greatness. And then the concept of Sanhedrin, of having judges, existed before. We find it in Mitzrayim and we find it before. And the Rebbe says it's commonsensical that the nations too had a concept of judges. And there's even a source for it in Torah by Lot that he was appointed a judge. Judges is not none of this is novel. So if you're looking for greatness, why choose these things? Even though they come from the Medrash, but Rashi doesn't quote Medrash unless it furthers his goal of highlighting the meaning of text. And if the meaning of text here is Rav, greatness, in Pshuta Shal Mikra, in text, what's called great? Look in the Chumash. The language is, was there ever something so great? Hanishma davar hagodol hazeh, the idea that God revealed and spoke through the fire. So those become the main questions. Okay. And the footnote, the Rebbe points out that if you're looking for another verse where the Torah speaks about greatness, it's by the revelation of the burning bush. Moshe looks and says, Hamara hagodol hazeh, this great thing. It's a similar concept. When Hashem is revealed, that's greatness. From a text level, that's what greatness is. So if you want to say that, Rav, you're not happy with the first interpretation, that it means enough, for whatever reason, you want to go to a second interpretation that it means greatness, talk about the revelation. Because revelation is greatness, as we see from those two instances, both in the Sinai and the burning bush, as well as Sinai. Rashi doesn't cite them at all. In fact, he cites a bunch of wonderful things, but things that don't seem novel and don't necessarily denote greatness. It's just nice achievements. So these are the questions. And then the Rebbe says, if you take a look at the Rashi, there's more questions. Primarily, this is the Rashi I'm quoting at the bottom, alongside its source. But before you start comparing the source, take a look at this line in the Rashi. What's wrong with this line? You want to tell them what they accomplished. You built a Mishkan, Menorah and the vessels, and you received Torah. It's out of order. Last time I checked, the first thing that happened is they got the Torah. Then they built the Mishkan. So why are you reversing the order? So why are you putting in menorah? If you tell me you built the Mishkan and the vessels includes the menorah. There's a lot of vessels. The Mishkan doesn't just have a menorah. It has the aron, and it has the showbread tables, it has the altars, and it has the wash basin. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So if you say vessels, Kalim, it includes everything. Why would Rashi make the emphasis on menorah? These are interesting, nuanced questions that are bothersome when you read the Rashi. Again, he puts it out of order. He puts the Mishkan building before the Torah giving. It's very strange. And he throws in menorah. If you're telling me you built the Mishkan and the vessels, it's all inclusive. So these are interesting questions. But then the Rebbe gives a zinger. When you compare Rashi to his source, you see that the source of Rashi, which is the Sifri primarily, that's the Medrash that we have, and it doesn't have either one of these problems. It quotes it in order. Torah receiving before the Mishkan. Thank you very much, because that's how it happened. And it does not delineate the menorah. Holy vessels includes everything. This is why the Sicha is so gishmak, because the Rebbe asks a few questions on the Rashi here with the order and with the menorah, and then he shows you that in the source you don't have this problem. So Rashi is clearly deviating from his source to make a point. He's making it out of order, chronologically. He's throwing in the menorah, which is not in his source. You can't just say he copied and pasted. What's he trying to tell me? And the Rebbe says, once we're at it, let's look at some other nuanced changes. The Medrash, his source, the Sifri says, your stay at the mountain is a reward, meaning it's been rewarding. Rashi says, not only reward, but you achieve greatness and reward. Gedula uschar. Remember, the Rebbe is teaching us how to learn a Rashi. What's that about? Also, in the Medrash, the language is, it's a reward. It's like something that you got. In the Rashi, it's something you achieved. You achieved greatness and reward for your stay at the mountain. It's a little different. He adds an extra word. Al yeshivaschem bahar. Again, every word is perfect. If he's copying the Medrash, why deviate? The Medrash just says the stay at the mountain has been rewarding. Rashi says the stay at the mountain has caused you to accomplish greatness and reward as an outcome. What's the point? By the way, if we're already looking at nuance, this is in the footnote. Rashi says you appointed Sanhedrin. His source says you appointed Zkenim elders. Rashi says you appointed. His source says I appointed, says God. Minisi aleichem. Friends, how many commentaries before the Rebbe were bothered by this? Yeah, the source says Minisi aleichem, I, Hashem appointed, and Rashi says Minisem aleichem, you appointed. Comes along our Rebbe and says, are you kidding? This is on purpose. Why? Look at all these changes, every line. And then to bring it home further, Rashi says you appointed judges, Sanhedrin, judges of thousands, judges of hundreds. In the Medrash, his source, seemingly, it continues, judges of 50s, judges of 10s. Why does he stop short? Okay. So we have all these questions. The main question is why we even need the second interpretation at all. The verse seems very straightforward. Rav Lachem, it's enough. Dayenu, die, enough, let's go. You don't need a second interpretation at all. And then we have in the second interpretation itself all these nuances. To recap quickly, why we do not quote the greatness that the Torah explicitly speaks, namely revelation. Instead, it was quoting things that don't seem too novel. And in the nuances of the Rashi, every line has nuances deviating from his source, as delineated earlier. So let's try to take this apart. Let's understand, as the Rebbe would always say, what's bothering Rashi. So we have question one. Question one, again, is the main question. Why do we even need a Midrashic interpretation? So there are Mefarshei Rashi, other commentaries who take apart Rashi. They're bothered by the same problem. The Rebbe is not the first one to ask that question. Why does Rashi bring a Midrashic interpretation when Rashi's stated goal is Pshat? So this question is bothering all the commentaries on Rashi. But they come up with a simple solution. They assume that when it says in the Torah, Rav Lachem, and as I said before earlier, this is important, it's not so straightforward. Rav Lachem, Rav means like great, a lot, much, too much, abundance. What does the word really mean? So they assume that the simple pshat of Rav means enough. That's what they assume. And therefore, they explain why Rashi needs a second interpretation, because if that's what it means, that's what it should have said. Why does it say Rav Lachem Sheves? It should say Dai Lachem Sheves. Enough. Say what you mean. If Rav means die, say die. Ayenu, Maspik, whatever the word would be, die. So that's what the commentaries of Rashi approach. That's how they deal with this. Rav lachem by them means enough. That's what they assume is the literal interpretation, the straightforward interpretation. Okay, but that's not sufficient, because if that's the case, it should have said die. And that's why they say, well, he chooses the word Rav because also hinting to a midrashic interpretation that it means a lot of stuff happened to you. Says the Rebbe, that's not a problem. What's bothering the commentaries, why it says Rav and not die, is not a problem, because we have precedent in Torah. By the story of Makas Borot, the hail is coming down for a whole week, destroying the whole Mitzrayim. And Paro summons Moshe and Aaron. He says, hello, please pray to God. I'm ready to send the people. Let's go, Gegangen. And he says, please pray to Hashem, V'rav. And it's enough. Tell him it's enough. He did enough. He could stop the hail. The verse is V'rav. The hail is V'rav. It's enough. And Rashi translates, because again, the word V'rav is not explicit. Says Rashi, Dailoi. It's enough for him. So we already know from an earlier Rashi that Rav and Dailoi is the same word, and it's not a problem. Why the Torah chose the word Rav? It did. So the problem of the commentaries does not resolve it. Their assumption that why does Rashi need a second interpretation is because Rav in Pshat straightforwardly means die, and therefore it should have said die. And that's why Rashi needs a second interpretation. The Rebbe says that I don't accept that, because we have an earlier verse in Torah by the hail where it says Rav, and it means die, and Rashi says so. And it's not a problem. He doesn't need a second interpretation. The first one is well enough alone, because it's fine. Rav means die, very good. So therefore, the Rebbe says, this is just an aside, not accepting the explanation of all the other commentaries. So we're back to our first question. Why do we need anything midrashic interpretation? If Rav means enough, that's it. Rav means enough, that's it. You don't need a second interpretation. So here's the Rebbe's explanation. The Rebbe says, no, this is a very important part of the Sicha. Rav does not mean enough. Does the word Rav sound like enough? Rav means more than enough. The Rebbe is going to show in the Sicha and in the footnotes 3 times, could be even more, but 3 times in the text where it says the word Rav, and it doesn't mean enough, it means more than enough. On Pshute Shel Mikra, if you're studying Torah straightforward, literal text, Rav doesn't mean enough. Rav means a lot, more than enough. And here are the 3 cases that you can go by. When the story of Korach, when the Leviim are demanding to become Kohanim, etc., and Moshe says, Rav lochem, b'nei Levi. You have more than enough, sons of Levi. And Rashi there translates, remember, Rav lochem, what does it mean? It's a strange word. Rashi says, you have taken for yourself more than enough greatness. Not enough, more than enough. And then another verse is when Esav and Yaakov meet, and Yaakov gives Esav gifts, and Esav doesn't want to accept him initially, and he says, Yesh li Rav, I have a lot. And Rashi comments, what does it mean, Rav? Way more than my needs. Yoser mikadei tzarki, more and more than my needs. Not enough. This is not a language of enough. In pshat, in literal text interpretation, the word Rav does not mean enough. It means more than. A third verse, this is in the footnote, that in today's section itself, a little later, when the Moshe is telling the people, Rav lochem, so v'sahar hazeh, it's been enough time that you've been circling this mountain. This is 39 years later, you see. The first Rav lochem Shabbos is right after the first year, before the sin of the spies. But 39 years later, after the sin of the spies, and this is a verse that's later in today's parsha, where the text says, okay, Rav lochem, it's enough that you're surrounding this mountain. But here Rashi don't even bother commenting because it's obvious. It's more than enough. For 40 years you're running around this mountain. Let's get going to Eretz Yisrael. So the Rebbe makes an argument, cut and dry, proving it from 3 different psukim, that when it says in Torah Rav, it doesn't mean enough. It means more than enough. You're going to argue, this is already in a footnote. How come by the hail, Rashi does say the translation of enough? That's the exception. This is already a footnote, just in passing. And the Rebbe explains, the way I understand it, the Rebbe is saying like this: Paro and the Egyptians are saying this is very destructive, this hail. The Rav, it's more than enough. It's unbearable. But when he's addressing Hashem, Paro is asking Hashem to remove it. So he says to Moshe, tell Hashem, Hatiru el Hashem, daven to Hashem, and tell him, V'rav, Dailoi, it's enough for him. He made his point. Because it's addressing Hashem. So over there you have to, so Rashi translates it, Dailoi, it's enough for him. But actually for the recipients of the hail, for the Egyptians, it was Rav, it was more than enough. It was over the top. But even from the perspective of Hashem, tell him it's enough. He made his point. But that is the anomaly. That's the exception. Generally speaking, it seems from all the other above cases, and there are more, that when the Torah uses the word Rav, more than enough. So here's where the problem becomes. So now let's reread the Rashi. The Torah says Rav lochem sheva, that Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu, just 11 months after coming to Har Sinai, Rav lochem sheva. It's more than enough that you're sitting there. Really? What's the more than enough? They're here 11 months. And they have to do a lot of things in these 11 months. This was a busy year. They were getting the Torah, and there were mitzvahs, and there were commandments, and there was luchas shniyas. And it was a full year. There wasn't a lot of downtime. It's 11 months. It just became a nation, and they had to set things up, etc., etc. If Rav Lochem now means more than enough, over the top, it hardly seems appropriate. So how could Rashi, that's what's bothering Rashi. Once we have established, as the Rebbe has, unlike the other Rashi commentaries, that Rashi, when it says in the text Rav, it means more than enough, this is a problematic verse. Rav lochem sheves, you're sitting 11 months at Har Sinai, you just became a nation, you're establishing a whole system, and all these events and all the Torah that was taught during those 11 months, and you're telling me Rav, it's more than enough, it's over the top? It's been a very busy year. It's okay to say time to go, but what's this more than enough? Why are we throwing a tantrum? So that's what's bothering Rashi. So Rashi answers. The first answer is kipshutei. Read it straightforwardly. Yeah, it is more than enough. How can you say it's more than enough? We just said it's not so much. It was a very busy year. Yeah, but look at the context of these verses. These verses, Moshe is repeating words from Hashem, of Hashem's urgency to rush the people to the Holy Land. That's the context. There's 3 psukim here that Moshe repeats from Hashem, which the Rebbe points out, you will not see them in the real time when it happened in the Chumash Bamidbar, when the Jews left the Shchedesh on year 2. It just says that came to pass on this and this day, and the cloud lifted and they went. It doesn't tell you the backstage conversations that Hashem had with Moshe Rabbeinu. I guess it's not relevant then. Now when Moshe is telling over the story, Moshe says, Hashem spoke to me. What do you think? We just left? Hashem said to me, let's go. This is more than enough. And there's 3 psukim there in our parsha. Hashem says, it's more than enough. I want you to go and conquer the land that I promised Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And as Rashi himself interprets, Hashem was anxious to rush them to the land. He had hoping that it would be an 11-day journey, bada bing, bada bang. So the context here is the urgency, the rushing, and therefore Rashi says, yes, kipshutei, the first interpretation is that you read it straightforwardly, Hashem is anxious, and therefore he's saying this is more than enough. Because if you're anxious for something, Hashem wants the Yidden to have it, it's Yisrael. So therefore, it follows that you can call something more than enough, even if it isn't. So that's how we would deal with the first question, with the first interpretation of Rashi. However, it's not totally satisfactory for another reason. Even if you want to say Hashem is throwing this tantrum, it's more than enough because of his love for the Yidden and his anxiousness that they should immediately get the land. And therefore he says, Rav lochem sheves, hello, it's more than enough, let's go. But there's another problem why that's not sufficient, because whose fault was it that they didn't go? It's his fault. He's calling the shots. So why is he coming along saying it's more than enough? Hello, honey, whenever you want to go, we're going to go. You ever go to a chasana with your wife or to a bar mitzvah? And you're ready to leave and she's schmoozing with all her friends? And then an hour later, she says, come on, it's more than enough. I've been waiting for you. You're calling the shots. Hashem is calling the shots. You didn't travel by virtue of the cloud. So why would he say Rav Lochem, even though he's anxious and he's urgent and he loves the Yidden and he really wants to bada bang this? But why would he say it's more than enough? Who's he complaining to? He's the one in charge. So therefore, the first answer of Rashi is not totally sufficient. And we need a second answer. Okay? And that's why he brings in the Midrashic interpretation. What do we accomplish so far? First of all, we know why we need a Rashi to be human. Because the problem is, Rav Lachem does not mean it's enough. It means it's more than enough. Why is it more than enough? It's only a year. Aha, the answer is the excitement of Hashem to rush them to Tzisrael. However, still not completely satisfactory, that answer alone, because if he's calling the shots, so why would he be complaining that it's more than enough? It's his own doing. So Rashi gives another answer. Rav Lachem doesn't mean it's more than enough. Rav Lachem means something different completely. You have accomplished great things at this mountain. What's the purpose of this second interpretation? Hashem is telling the Yidden through Moshe, it's time to go to the land, and you're ready for it. This is key. To go to the land is a scary notion. Here you are, a holy people, a miraculous people, the Jewish nation, and now you're going to go to the land? The land means you're going to the real world and you become a nation among nations. And this is going into the secular environment, the natural environment, without the heavenly bread, etc. And that's a scary notion. Will we lose our Yiddishkeit? Will we lose Chas v'Shalom, our identity as a holy nation? That's the fear. And it says Rashi that that's what, in the second interpretation, says Rashi, that's what Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu. Tell the people, Rav Lochem Sheves, their stay at this mountain has equipped them greatly. They're ready. That would make sense. Not just complaining, throwing a tantrum. Come on, because who's he throwing a tantrum? He's calling the shots. He's empowering the Yidden. Tell the Yidden, don't be afraid. Rav Lachem Sheves, you have accomplished great things. You have matured, you have grown, you have become equipped for this mission. You can go and you will remain a holy nation in Eretz Yisrael. Says the Rebbe, if this is the purpose of the Rashi and of the Pasuk, we now have explained everything. You see. In the Medrash, Hashem is basically telling the Jewish people through Moshe Rabbeinu all the wonderful things that he did for them. In Rashi, Hashem is telling them all the wonderful achievements that they accomplished. In the Medrash, is more top down. It's like you tell your bar mitzvah boy, look what we did. We made you a bar mitzvah and you got all these presents and you had all the things that happened to you. You're so lucky. That's how the Medrash reads. You're going to see in a second. Whereas Rashi reads bottom up. Look at all the things that you achieved. You are trained. You are now ready for the Olympics. You're ready to be a holy nation in a mundane land, and you have what it takes. It's bottom up. Parenthetically, according to Hasidic Taichav, why the Jews failed with the mission of the spies, which happened immediately after this, unfortunately, and derailed the plan for 40 years. And according to Chassidus, it's because the Yidden Taka were afraid of that approach. They were afraid to go to the land. They were afraid they'd be swallowed up spiritually. So the Sicha is so geschmack that would be Hashem's forewarning. Don't be afraid. You're equipped. So in summation, Rashi's goal here is different than the Sifri, even though the Sifri is his source, let's say, or another Medrash maybe. But the goal is diametrically opposed. The Medrash is just saying, let's go. Look at all the things you had. So many good things happened to you. It's time to move on to the next adventure, I guess. Rashi says, no. You have accomplished, you have grown so much, you become a Goy Kodesh. You can do this. Don't be afraid. You're equipped. Then it makes sense. Otherwise, why in Pshat and the literal interpretation do I need to know all the stuff that happened? Why is that a reason to go or not go? Why? In Pshat, that has to make sense. In Pshat, it means you're afraid of this next leg of the journey, and you're going to go into the land, you might lose your identity, etc. Says the Eibishter, don't be afraid. You are ready. Rav lochem shanis. Ha! And that explains all the differences. So first of all, it explains. So in the Medrash, being it's top down, your stay at the mountain was very rewarding. You got a lot of goodies, because remember, the Medrash is like top down, whatever you got. Rashi says, no, what the real meaning here is, you achieved greatness and reward. It doesn't remain just with the word reward. It interprets what does reward really mean. I guess Rashi is telling us the deeper meaning of the Medrash. What does it mean really to reward? It's a greatness. You accomplished it for the stay at the mountain. It's not that the mountain, you sat there and you got a lot of wonderful revelations. You also did some good work. You put in keiches and you achieved things. And you got reward for your achievement. This was a growth spurt. And what's the proof? Take a look. You built a Mishkan, a temple, and a Sanhedrin. So the first thing we said is that the order is different. So the Rebbe says, take a look at the bottom of the screen. To be equipped to go into the land, you need three things. You need, first of all, to recognize and internalize that you're a holy people. Hashem rests amongst you. You're not a regular nation. You're a nation that hosts the Shekhinah. The second thing is that Shekhinah's presence needs to become part of your daily life and behavior. And third, you have to have teachers to guide you in that behavior. That A, B, and C is the order. The first thing is the Mishkan, because the Mishkan is the presence of the Shekhinah. And in the Mishkan too, Rashi emphasized the additional menorah, because we know from an earlier Rashi that the menorah, because of the miraculous fire that never went out, more than any other vessel in the Mishkan, was, as the language is, Eidus l'chol ba'olam. It's a testimony to the entire world, Shashchina shayri b'Yisrael, that the divine presence rests among the Jewish nation, and therefore menorah is pivotal. If the goal here is to show that the Yidden got the message, and the whole world got the message, that the Yidden really are a host to the Shekhinah, it's not just the Mishkan and the Kalim in general, it's the menorah in particular. And in addition, you got the Torah, which is B. You have directives for day-to-day life. And then you have the Sanhedrin, which is C, teaches to guide you. Whereas in the Medrash, it's not so focused on this idea of the achievement and the transformation of the Yidden in this A, B, and C. It's just talking about good things that happen to them. So it goes in chronological order. But Rashi deviates from it and gives you the interpretation of the Medrash, I guess, on a deeper level. And especially in the light of Pshat, that we're empowering the Yidden to tell them what they have achieved. And what does it mean to be achieved and be equipped? A, B, and C. And in that order. Mishkan, Torah, Sanhedrin. Chronological order notwithstanding. And with the addition of menorah, which we know from the Torah earlier and from Rashi, the menorah's function is a witness for the world of the Shekhinah, of that A. And this theme continues. The Medrash says, Minisi aleichem zkenim. Hashem says, I appointed for you elders. Rashi says, you. Remember, the Medrash is saying all the wonderful things that happened to you. Look how spoiled you've been. Look how lucky you've been. Rashi is interpreting it to mean everything that you have accomplished. You appointed. Now, the truth is, who appointed the Sanhedrin? Was it the Eibishter or Moshe? The answer is both. If you look at the Parshas Yisrael, when Yisrael came up with the idea, so to speak, Hashem, so he said, if Hashem commands, you have to first ask Hashem, and Moshe asked Hashem, and Hashem said yes. And then Hashem to Moshe, you should do it. So it was both. But the Medrash's emphasis is what happened to us. So it speaks about Hashem's appointment. Rashi's emphasis is what the Yidden did. You become a nation, you become refined, you appointed, you. In the footnote, the Rebbe addresses the difference that the Rashi says Sanhedrin and the Medrash says elders, Canim. It's not in the actual Sicha, but the Rebbe responds because, again, since technically the elders were not appointed at Mount Sinai, the elders already existed in Egypt. They were the elders that Moshe and Aaron took when they went to Paro. And the actual appointment of the elders on top of the people was not until Kibris HaTaiva. Later, when they asked for the meat in the portion of Ba'alois. So either way, the appointment of the elders was not at Har Sinai. On a Midrashic level, it's not a problem, I guess, because the Midrash is not so literal. But in a Rashi level, where it's all about Pshuta Shal Mikra, the text says, look what happened to you at this mountain. It's got to be something that happened at this mountain. So Rashi deviates. Instead of skating, he writes Sanhedrin. And how perfect. And then to continue, where Rashi drops the 50s and the 10s in the level of judges, the levels of 50s and 10s only existed in the Midbar. When they came to Eretz Yisrael, they established themselves, they didn't need 50s and 10s. Apparently, when you're in an established place, you don't need so many leaders for every 10 people. Maybe the example would be, when you go to summer camp and everything's all moving around, everyone's living in tents or whatever, every bunk has 10 campers, they need a counselor. When you go to yeshiva, you can have 25, 30 kids and one teacher. I'm just thinking of an example. When you're living in a more established environment, you don't need so many leaders for every 10 people, every 50 people. Genug. Hundreds and thousands. That's the reality. As you look in the Tanakh later, you'll see that once the Yidden came to Eretz Yisrael, the system of Sanhedrin was thousands and hundreds, and that's it. So therefore, this Sifri, the Medrash, which is just trying to tell us all the goodies that God did for us and all the wonderful things, how lucky we were, top down, it gives you the whole story. Thousands, hundreds, tens, 20. But in the Rashi, which is about the achievement for the Yidden, empowering them to go to Eretz Yisrael, it's futuristic. It's looking ahead. You have established Sanhedrin, and what's more important in this case, the Sanhedrin that will be taken with you into the future. So we drop the 10s and the 100s, the 50s. The relevance is that which you have become a people equipped for the future. And in the future, you won't need them. So this becomes extraordinary how every nuance in Rashi, and basically explaining how Rashi is not just here to give midrashic interpretations. When it says that Rav Lochem, so I'm recapping. The first interpretation, Rav Lochem means it's over the top, it's way more than enough. That is not a satisfactory explanation because the Yidden only stayed there for 1 year. It's not so much. And plus, it was Hashem's own choosing. That's why Rashi feels a need for a second shot. And what is the second shot doing? It's empowering the Yidden. Yes, don't be afraid. Because you got what it takes. And that's why he quotes a medrash. But the Rebbe says in the footnote, perhaps there was another medrash which was written exactly like Rashi. But clearly, the Sifri is one of the sources, but he deviates as above in all these details to make this point. It's so geschmack, it's so perfect, how every single nuance and change adds up. The Rebbe closes with 2 lessons. The Rebbe says we know that even though Rashi is pshat, but also Rashi hints to many other things. So this is the Rashi in front of you. So the first thing the Rebbe says, the Dibur HaMaschil, the words that Rashi quotes from the Pasuk, which is his header of his entry, is precise. It's Rab Lochem Sheves. Now, maybe it should have been Rab Lochem Sheves B'Har Hazeh. It's enough spending time at this mountain. Maybe that should have been the header. Proof is that in the second interpretation of Rashi, he speaks about this mountain. But Rashi makes a point to cut the header short, Rab Lochem Sheves, and then he says his first commentary, Kipshute, straightforward. And then the second interpretation, he says, no, it brings in the concept of B'Har Hazeh, of this mountain. So the Rebbe says that there's a precision and a hint and a lesson. This is a more of a deeper level of the wine of Torah, I guess. And the Rebbe says that Rashi is telling a Yid, whatever level you're at, Rav Lochem Sheves, don't sit put. Don't stay on the same level. Whatever level Yiddishkeit you are in learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, Rav Lochem Sheves, the Torah is making a statement. Cut it out of context. Not that Rav Lochem Sheves is enough at this mountain. Rashi wants you, for the sake of this lesson, to just see those 3 words. It's enough sitting in one place. Kipshute. Straightforward. Stop sitting in one place. You reach a plateau in terms of your mitzvahs and your Torah study. You're going, you're next. You got to move on. Simple, straightforward lesson. And then the Rebbe says in the second lesson that these two interpretations of the same verse are two sides of the same coin. What's going on? Hashem is saying it's time to go to the land. And not just go, but you can go quick. So the Rebbe says that the first interpretation is explaining, let's go, there's an urgency. Why are we delaying this great mitzvah of taking the land, which Hashem promised? There's an urgency, go get it. The second one is explaining why really you deserve it. And the Rebbe explains that the two complement each other. The fact that the Yidden are given the land, and it should be as soon as possible. It's because really Yidden deserve it and they are prepared for it. Meaning to say, this is opposite of most nations. You see, most nations, in order to become a nation, they need a land. In fact, what makes them a nation? Their national identity. They have a land and I guess a language and a flag. The land makes them who they are. Here's the opposite. The land is a holy land. It's Hashem's land. When Yidden, but since Yidden are a holy people, that's the second part of the Rashi. You're a holy people. You have Torah, you have Shechina, you're holy people. Therefore, you might as well rush into the land. So by giving these two answers, there's a fantastic hint here. There's two sides of the coin. Of course, you should get this land, but not because you need the land to make you a Jewish people, but the contrary, because you are a Jewish people. Jewish connection to Eretz Yisrael, the eternal connection to Eretz Yisrael, is not because we once conquered it. It's because we are a holy people and it is a holy land. It's ours in essence. It's ours pre-creation. So that's how the Rebbe reads these two answers as complementing each other. It's extraordinary Sicha. But I think the overriding lesson here, the overlying message, in addition to seeing the perfect precision in the Rashi, where the Rebbe teaches us, is to understand this idea that the goal here is from the bottom up, the preparation of the Yidden to be prepared for this mission.